a categorization of various mechanisms of change. So what makes something change? For instance, one great mechanism of change within the obesity world is self-monitoring. If you self-monitor, it helps you to change your behavior. People who weigh themselves every day, unless they're really crazy or have some really bad disorder, people who weigh themselves every day tend to keep better track of their weight and tend to be able to. So one of the things in weight loss interventions is if people actually comply with the weighing themselves every day, that seems to help. So that's a mechanism of change. Let's talk a little bit about those theories. But I want you to have a couple of key terms first. When I say theory, and this is, we can argue about this every time we put in a paper, we argue about this with the reviewers. When I say theory, I mean a formalized set of concepts. It organizes observations, it inferences, it helps you to think about things, and it explains and predicts behavior and outcome. But it's a model, it's a conceptual model. It doesn't really have any data behind it, right? That's what most of these theories are, balls and arrows. Now, when I say model, I mean an empirical model. It's quantifiable, it's a testable version of theory. And sometimes it's called a mathematical or statistical model, but I mean computational model. And we can now have those today. We didn't used to be able to because of mobile technologies. And I'm going to talk more about that. A couple more terms. A construct is a hypothetical, right? Like sleep. It's a construct. Or maybe because you have stuff that before you can have data on it, you have to be able to measure it, right? Diet is a construct. Intelligence, motivation, fear, anger, constructs that you can't even see, right? But we can think about them. They help us think. They're organizing principles. A variable is what we measure, and it's never going to be the Platonian construct. A variable is the thing that we measure. So the accelerometer that measures physical activity is a measure of physical activity. It's not physical activity, it's an imperfect measure, but it's a measure. That's a variable, something that we use that's something that we make data. It's data, right? Some variables are immediately observable and some are not. And then there are mechanisms of change, which we just talked about. So these are key terms. I'm going to show you a couple of theories now. There's a lot of argument about theory. This dual process of behavioral control is one of my favorite because it says that really there are kind of two ways of coming downstairs. There are sensory processes that we don't necessarily process cognitively, and then there's cognitive processes that we do. And these are two different ways to influence behavior, through the sensory and through the conscious. So the automatic, unconscious, and the conscious or rational. A favorite theory of mine. Thank you, Misha Pavel, for the slide. Another favorite theory of mine called the self-determination theory. This theory says that perceptions of autonomy, feeling that you have support also of your choices that you make, increase your perceived confidence, and that influences self-regulation for behavior change. You are more able to regulate your behavior, and this changes and maintains behavior change. Another favorite theory. So there are hundreds. Here is a problem, though. Our current theories are incredibly static. So let me map this out for you. The self-determination theory says relatedness, control, and support lead to perceived confidence and self-regulation. That leads to motivation, and that leads to behavior change, right? What's wrong with this theory? It's one way. It's a one-way ticket from here to there, from A to B. And I don't know about you guys. I saw two really good motions there. You're both right. And that is, I don't know about you guys, but this is not how my behavior works. So let's talk about me, one of my favorite topics. And let's talk about chocolate, dark chocolate, one of my other favorite topics. So this is how my behavior works, right? So here we've got morning, midday, afternoon, evening. This is behavior throughout the day. And my desire to eat chocolate sort of changes throughout the day, right? Yeah. And another thing that influences whether or not I'm going to eat chocolate is not just desire, but if there's any around. I mean, I would have some now, but I left it at home. So there's the proximity of chocolate, right? And those two things vary independently of one another pretty much throughout the day. And you can see on this particular day, in the evening, I really want chocolate, and it's sitting in a bowl right next to me on the couch, and I am so going to eat that chocolate. Okay, so let's add another variable. How about stress? I personally am a stress eater. If I'm stressed, there's chocolate around, I will totally eat that. So these three things vary independently or independently mostly of one another throughout the day. This particular evening, I'm completely over it. I'm not feeling the love for chocolate. I don't really want it. However, I'm a tiny bit stressed, and there's chocolate right next to me. What's going to happen? Speak to me, people. I'm so going to eat the chocolate, right? Okay, let's add Darcy. Darcy's my best friend. She also really likes chocolate. So now it's going to happen. And, how close Darcy is to me, is she at my house? Are we taking a walk? Okay, this evening, I really want chocolate. I would actually have to get up and go to the other room for it. If I've already had a glass of whiskey, that might not happen. Single malt. But I'm a little bit stressed out. And then the killer, Darcy, comes over. All right, what's going to happen? Eat the chocolate. I'm going to eat the chocolate. So there's some new guiding principles now that we can look at behavior in this way. We have new means for continuous behavior and physiological monitoring and momentary self-report. This is all through wearables, deployables, invisibles, chemical sensing, your digital breadcrumbs, and cell phones. That's the game changer, smartphones, right? Now, Santosh is going to talk about all the other stuff. For a moment, though, indulge me, I'm going to talk about smartphones. This is the furthest I've been away from my phone in like months. I'm feeling itchy. I left it in my case. But these mobile phones that you carry around, they have more computing capacity than the computer that I used for my dissertation. Yes, they do. And that thing was a mainframe. It was like bigger than my house. And I'm carrying a thing around in my pocket. It's amazing. It senses all sorts of stuff: proximity, who I'm near, my physical activity, where I am. It's got microphones to capture sound, ambient sound, but also what I say. We can use those sounds in this tone of my voice. I have a colleague at USC, Stefan, who can diagnose depression almost completely accurately, not by what I say, but by the spaces in between my words, how long they are, and the tone of voice. All of the cell phone, and it's all done on cell phones, with smartphones. Internet, social networks, it's got, a complete record of everything you do, pretty much. And real-time data transfer, so we can intervene on you. We can talk to each other. I can ask you things in real time, and I can tell you things in real time. And it all integrates with these wearable sensors that I'm not going to get to talk about, but Santosh will do that. So that is really a game changer. These are now allowing us to think about behavior dynamically, in real time, and in context, because context is king. Context is king. And I just want to dispel from this really quick that in 2015, which was last year already, this is so last year, youth age 13 to 17, 88% of them had a mobile phone, and 73% had smartphones. And there were no ethnic and socioeconomic status differences. So it's a thing, people. Another key term. So now we've looked at these models. We've looked at the kind of data that we can get for behavior. And what we need to do now is start thinking about behavior dynamically. A dynamic model takes into account momentary and longitudinal changes in relationships between constructs, with in-person fluctuations. So I'm not always in the same mood all day, as you guys will probably find out during this week. And the influence of shifting contexts on all of the things that we're interested in, right? So this here in the ground is a little bit what a dynamic model looks like. This is a control systems, and I'm just gonna, Peter's gonna do a lot more of this, but I'm just gonna real quick say, let's say that this says that self-efficacy influences. And think of these as tanks, that they fill up or they empty during the day, right? And as the water rises in self-efficacy, that influences behavior. Maybe I'm trying to stay on a healthy diet. And the higher the water in this tank, the higher the water in this tank. But if something up here happens, like my self-management skills fail on me and I eat the wrong thing, my tank empties, and then my good behavior tank empties along with that too. And that fluctuates during the day. And now with these new technologies, we can get at that and we can intervene. So key questions that you need to ask yourself as you guys start developing these interventions is what new? What is your specific outcome and interest? Example, obesity. Sorry, you guys, it's lazy of me, but it's what I have asked. Which population do you want to study? I can tell you now that if you're working in a population from India, a little bit of visceral fat goes a long way in that particular physiology, and their dietary habits are completely different than, for instance, Hispanic populations in the United States. So how you intervene, what drives those interventions, what drives behavior, how the environment looks, is all going to be very different depending on the populations. The culture and country matters, socioeconomic status, urban versus rural matters very, very much, age, development, and health status. All of these things matter when you're developing an intervention, so choose your population. And another key question is what? Choose your battles. Bonnie Spring has shown that we can intervene on multiple behaviors, but you can't intervene on them all. So multiple behavior change is a thing. There's lots of articles about it. It can be very, very useful to pick behaviors that work together, or to give people choices about the behaviors they might want to change first when working, for instance, in a dietary intervention. But choose your battles. And where possible, make those battles evidence-based. A key question is also the deeper what. Which determinants are related to the behaviors in question? Please try and choose an evidence-based theory or set of constructs. So, for instance, this favorite model, if we're trying to do diet, and I choose the self-determination theory and hope that that helps in attacking some of the behaviors that I would go after. One of the big ones is, for instance, sedentary breaks, which you'll see in a moment. But this slide, reverently borrowed from my colleague Brother, lets you know that it's not only the individual that behaves and that influences behavior, or the behavior that you want to influence. You know, the environment influences the change mechanisms of change, influences behaviors, influences outcomes. Where in that do you want to intervene? Do you want to intervene everywhere? I've seen that fail miserably. So you need to make some choices. You need to really think about what's driving the behaviors that you want to change. So which, what, when, how? You got to pare it down. Which constructs, which variables, what are you going to measure? Which behaviors, what outcomes do you want to intervene on? What's the proximal intervention? For instance, if I want to change diet, if I want to lower your sugar intake, let's say, the reason I want to do that is because I want to combat obesity. So that's my distal outcome. Lowering sugar intake is a little bit more proximal. And more proximal yet is changing your motivations, right? To do whatever it is that influences that sugar intake. You have to figure out how to measure this stuff, which is a transdisciplinary collaboration. It used to just be that as a psychologist, I would go to the most beautifully developed questionnaire with good psychometric properties. But when I got into obesity, it's like, measuring nutrition, you really need somebody who knows how to do that. And now that we have mobile health, you're always going to need a computer scientist, an engineer, somebody to help you with the kind of measurement that we have, with all this amazing data that we're getting from all the sensors and phones. Timing, frequency, and the context of measurement really, really matters. So you have to choose your battles too. Like with accelerometry, everybody knows what an accelerometer is. Is there somebody who doesn't know? Okay, good. So with accelerometry, we can measure continuously. Physical activity can be measured on a continuous basis. One of the few things that we can measure continuously. So at some point we also have to deal with battery life. So choose when, how, what the context is that you want to measure and how you're going to trigger that. Which technologies are you going to use? Where can you measure ubiquitously? Where do you want to measure ubiquitously? And where do you want on demand, or where do you want to ask? Because I can tell you, we've shown in my lab conclusively that stress measured by salivary cortisol and stress measured by self-report, perceived, correlate at about 40. 45. So they're both relevant measures of stress, but sometimes you need them both, depending on what they're related to, which outcomes they're related to. So which validated measures, and there's a problem with that too, because for instance, an ecological momentary assessment, which is asking people questions on the phone, we don't really have a lot of validated short questionnaires. We have no, I would say, really well-validated short questionnaires to do that. Because what's the deal with questionnaires? How many of you remember this? But we want test, retest reliability. We want them to be stable over time. But I don't want that anymore. I am done. I'm over it. For some things, I want that. For some things, there's still a really good place for that in science. But what we really want is the interperson variability. We want to know how you, we want measures that are sensitive to that and that pick it up. So trait versus state, there is still a role for those really great questionnaires and for those really great measures and for bringing people into the lab, for doing things, you know, the old-fashioned way. The new frontier is finding the best way to mesh those so that we get what we want. And that is changing all the time. All right. So what can behavioral science do for you? New technologies, and you guys are all going to get techno joy if you don't have it already by the end of this week. It's not magic, folks. They are gadgets. You need best practices in development, design, and deployment. Technology can add to fundamental knowledge and behavior, and vice versa. Really, otherwise, we just have toys. You need to be theory-driven. You need to have a model in your mind of how that behavior works. And you need to have targeted outcomes. You need help with the best measures, understanding which mechanisms of change you want to target, and expertise in specific populations, targeting, tailoring, and participatory design. What we really want to do, and what I think the combination of behaviorist and human-centered design, what we are best at, is talking people into giving us their data all the time. That's what we want. I want all of your data all the time because I'm a data whore. Sorry. I said that. Okay. Case study. I always use the same case study because this is so old it's not even funny. But this was like when cell phones were still bricks. But it was so much fun, so I'm going to use it. NOMI Networks was a suite of mobile Bluetooth-enabled wireless wearable sensors. It interfaced with a mobile phone and a secure server. It processed data in real time, and it was designed specifically for and by overweight minority youth. So they actually were with me in the lab helping me to design this. I had an advisory committee of about 10 kids that were, I saw them for a couple of years as they grew. They designed the interface, they helped. It was really very fun. And this is what they wore back in the day, that phone. I know it looks like a brick. And they had a heart rate monitor that they wore on a strip. Because back in the day when I did this, that was before smartwatches and nobody wanted to wear bracelets. They didn't want that. I thought they'd want jewelry, but they wanted it unseeable. So they were fine with a chest strap, really. That's why you need to get your populations in, and that's why you need to keep getting them in because it changes all the time. And so they had a heart rate monitor and an accelerometer. And this was what their phone face looked like. They helped us design this. And we had a Korean student who was doing the actual programming, and he programmed the colors backwards because that's a cultural thing. The red was here, and the green was here. So he had to redo that. So culture, very important. But what this is this is a sedentary timer. And this, if you get up to 140 minutes of sedentary time, this is before the research came out, about half an hour is long enough in sedentary time. And if you got to there, we would start bothering you. We could see it on the back end. We would start texting you, hi there, Tom. But you could reset this at any moment by 10 minutes, and they didn't have to be contiguous of physical activity. So if you had any 10 minutes in that 2-hour time of physical activity, this thing would reset. We had at the time personalized algorithms for each kid, which is a rabbit hole I wouldn't go down again. They all came into the lab. We knew if they were standing, sitting, lying down, fidgeting. They were pretty good. I have a wonderful confusion matrix I won't show you. We made some theory and evidence guided choices in this just-in-time adaptive intervention. So we decided when to intervene. 2 hours of sedentary behavior after school. That was evidence-based at the time, best evidence at the time. And we measured physical activity with sensors, used algorithms to translate that into something that I understood, and time. The tailoring variables were the child's current location and access. We did that with a detailed intake. So really important is that if you are working with kids, you better be right. That's another thing. I mean, if you beat them and say you've been sedentary for 2 hours and they haven't been, they're over you. So you need good algorithms. But you also, you don't want, if Johnny lives in a dangerous neighborhood and it's 6 o'clock at night and it's dark, which can happen here, you don't want to send him out to a park that's dangerous. So you need to know. So we had a whole background on each kid for the watchers. And the watchers were trained in motivational interviewing. So this is a technique long loved in psychology that and social work that helps, that you come alongside people. So you treat them with autonomy. You don't say, you should do that. You say, if you're doing it right, these are people, you say, what about, what do you think you should do? You come alongside, right? The decision rule was child availability and common sense. So if the child was not available and if we started texting them, thanks for being here, it's a pleasure. If you texted them and they said, sorry, and I'll give you an example. So Johnny is sedentary for 2 hours. The watcher sees that on the back end and also gets a message and texts Johnny and says, hi there, you've been sedentary for 2 hours. What about it? What do you think? And Johnny texted back and said, I'm at my grandmother's house. We're eating dinner. I can't get up now. Leave me alone. I said, okay, reset. 5 minutes later, Johnny texting the watcher, I'm really bored. What are you doing? The watcher says, well, I'm trying to get you to be active. So they go back and forth and back and forth. And finally, Johnny gets up and helps his grandmother clear the table. So, which is amazing anyway. So really funny example of how you make decisions based also on the availability and the meaningful moment for a kid. We used motivational interviewing, and the proximal outcome was a reduction in sedentary time. Now, did we get that? We did. I'm giving myself a break because it was 10 kids for this pilot study and the p-value, but it's actual, really clinically relevant reduction in minutes of sedentary time over a couple of days. We wanted to know, was it the novelty of wearing NOMI or was it the prompts? Did the prompts really matter? And we saw that the accelerometer counts were higher in the following a 10-minute period after a prompt as opposed to a 10-minute period where there was no prompt. We wondered if the theory mattered. So we wonder if this was based on self-determination theory, slightly rebuilt to be dynamic, and we wondered, and embodied by the utterances of the watchers, of the text messaging. So we wondered if that mattered. So we went back and coded all the text messages that went out. And we rediscovered the wheel. What did we find out? Because my watchers weren't perfect, they were students. This is housekeeping texts, like, hi there, like this whole discussion with Johnny about, what are you doing? I'm bored. Or hi, good morning. Often they would text us, hi there, I'm wearing my sensors right now, or we would text them, your sensor's not working. So that's housekeeping. These are prompting questions. So if we did a prompting questions like, what do you think you should be doing now? Physical activity went up. Really great. These are for affirmation messages, like, hey, Johnny, you did so great last time, and now you're just sedentary, but what do you think? What did we find out? Physical activity went up after those kind of messages. And here's the wheel that we rediscovered. If we said to the kids, we really think you should do this, so if we told them what to do, no increase in physical activity. So we found out that kids do not like to be told what to do. I should Nobel Prize. All right, so the takeaway messages here are understanding the behaviors you choose to intervene on is key. Current and emerging technologies provide the data to transform these static theories of behavior, these conceptual models, into dynamic mathematical models of behavior, computational models of behavior. These can guide development and testing of any intervention in just in time and in real time, these new interventions that we can do. But a caveat is you need a model in order to know what, when, and how to measure. What do I mean, coming back to the opening slide, when I say understanding behavior? I mean, precisely which behavior do you need to intervene on? What are the determinants of that behavior? Is it changed by motivation? Is it changed by environment? What theories can help you here? What principles or mechanisms of behavior change? What kind of intervention do you think is going to work and why? And thinking about personalization. What works for what person and in what dose? And that's going to change. If you go back to my chocolate model, in some cases you just have to move the chocolate. In other cases, I'll find it wherever you put it, right? And context, where and when to deliver. Context really matters. So, call me all the time. And that's it. Thank you. Please take the next one.